They thought they were out of range. They thought they were secure. They were dead wrong. Putin and the Russians are very much integrated into Iran's defense. Russia is actually losing the initiative, particularly in the southern sectors in Ukraine. We've just crossed the drone threshold into an entirely new, terrifying era of combat. As Trump demands NATO warships police the Strait of Hormuz, and Putin weighs up making his riskiest move ever, indicators and signals show the battlefield in Ukraine has fundamentally changed in Zelensky's favour. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. We're seeing the tempo of Ukraine's drone attacks reach a breaking point for Russia. Russian air defences are on their knees in the occupied regions. In the sea, things aren't looking any better, with devastating hybrid attacks in Putin's supposedly safe Navy ports. Across the front lines, Ukraine counterattacks are seizing hundreds of square kilometres, forcing Putin into a strategic choice. Does he plug the gaps and defend Ukraine's advances, or does he allocate the manpower and military material for the stalling spring/summer offensive that is in the planning? Back in Moscow, an internet blackout has gripped the capital as the Kremlin tests a whitelist system to silence dissent. Amid the silence, there are whispers of internal power struggles, military coups, and even a desperate raid on people's savings to keep this costly war going. Putin is losing his grip on Ukraine, but could he be pushed into a collision course with the United States in Iran? Today, we'll analyse the tactical shift in the East, plus the high-tech asymmetric weapons that may prove to be the winning ones in Iran. But first, let's take a look at clips from the front lines across the globe to set the scene. So we begin with this striking footage of a fiber-optic FPV drone, but this isn't Ukraine. This is Baghdad in Iraq. We're seeing a Ukraine-ification of other war zones. An FPV drone operated by Iranian-backed militias flies over the large Victory Base complex, a major military base near Baghdad International Airport. This is one of the first known videos showing an FPV drone used in this conflict. And watch how the operator loiters. They're testing the CRAM's blind spots. That's the counter-rocket artillery and mortar system. At Victory Base, we're seeing the myth of the green zone perimeter being dismantled for a few $100s. And look at this flight path. It's low, it's hugging the structures. Traditional radar is tuned for high-velocity missiles and larger UAVs. These mosquito tactics are designed to slip under the digital fence of the most expensive defences on the planet. And note the lack of static. On a standard FPV, you'd see interference as it nears jamming pods. Not here. This is fiber-optic lead, the unjammable umbilical cord. Electronic warfare, the West's primary shield, is effectively useless against this. This second clip from Baghdad shows a hostile FPV in operation over the US Embassy compound in Baghdad. The embassy is a fortress, but it's built for a 20th century war. When you see an FPV circling the helipad like this, it's a clear signal to Washington. We can touch you whenever we want, and your multi-billion-dollar jammers and missiles can't stop us. The lessons for NATO? You can't fight a swarm with a shield. These clips prove that Iranian-backed militias have leapfrogged a generation of defence. If the US doesn't rapidly integrate interceptor drones and anti-drone drones Zelensky has been offering, the cost of staying in Iraq will soon become bloodier than any politician can ever justify. So now look at this Ukrainian drone attack. This is back on the Ukrainian-Russian front. This is a Yasteb AV, the absolute crown jewel of Russia's counter-battery capability. It's a $50 million piece of kit, a phased array beast designed to sniff out Ukrainian artillery the moment a shell leaves the barrel. But this time, the hunter became the hunted. After the first hit, the Russians panicked and tried to escape. But no bother for the Ukrainian pilot. They actually landed the drone on the radar vehicle itself and hitched a lift for a little bit. And after the ride, the Ukrainian drone rises up again and finishes the job. Lazar's group, a specialist National Guard unit, didn't just stumble upon this randomly. They worked with the North Electronic Intelligence Centre to not just find the vehicle, but map a signature. Note the chassis of the Russian equipment, the 4-axle Baz-6910. It's supposed to be mobile, but in the age of the transparent battlefield, there is just nowhere to hide. This isn't just a loss of expensive equipment, it's a total failure of the Russian protection envelope deep behind the lines in Lushansk. It's another example of the asymmetric warfare Ukraine is expert at. And if you can't protect your most advanced radar from a drone crew, your artillery, the so-called god of war, is fighting blind. So here we're looking at the Sergil-2 ballistic missile, Tehran's heavy hitter. This isn't just another rocket, it's a two-stage solid propellant ballistic missile with a range of over 2,000 kilometers. Look at the velocity and the stability of the launch. Because it's solid fuel, the Iranians don't need hours of visible preparation to fuel it up on the pad. They can roll this out of a missile city tunnel, fire and scoot before the US Reaper drone even knows the doors are open. This is another club in the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' Gulf bag to destabilize the region. From its launch sites in central Iran, the Sergil can reach as far as Tel Aviv, Cairo, or even the southern edges of Europe, including the British sovereign base areas on Cyprus. However, what they don't seem to realise is that the Aegis-class cruiser, the Type 45 destroyer that the British have, and the Patriot missile can deal with ballistic missiles such as this. So let's start with the signals coming out of the Gulf. The initial operation, Epic Fury strikes on the 28th of February, decapitated the Iranian regime. But the quick win the White House hoped for has developed into a regional firestorm. The current situation is critical. But when we put quick win into context, the few weeks that this has been going is not going to achieve the strategic outcomes that Donald Trump or his military planners will be looking at. We're talking of weeks, if not months, before we start to see that. However, Iran has effectively closed the Straits of Hormuz using saturation strategy of sea mines and those low-cost FPV drones we just saw. President Trump is turning up the heat, warning NATO allies they face a very bad future if they don't join a coalition to police this little strait. But the response from Europe is fractured. London and Berlin are holding back. Looking at the latest from the Institute for the Study of War, their assessment is clear. Despite the noise, the military trajectory in the Gulf is leaning in Washington's favour. The US and Israel are methodically dismantling Iran's strategic centre of gravity, that is their drone and missile infrastructure. Before and after photos released by CENTCOM show the devastating barrage of military strikes on the Iranian military sites, including attack drone production factories and 8 buildings destroyed at the Yazid military depot, part of the IRGC's missile command infrastructure, and these were used to produce both light and heavy torpedoes. So here's the ground truth. When it comes to Iran, attrition is working. Iranian strike rates are on a downward curve. While Tehran is still launching these attacks, they haven't achieved the existential damage they intended. We aren't seeing operationally significant losses or mass casualties on the US side. The ISW is right to caution us. This campaign is far from over. It's going to take time to fully neutralise the threat and stop the economic bleeding. But while the world's eyes are fixed on the plume of smoke over Tehran, we cannot afford to ignore the secondary effect this is having on the Kremlin. Putin is watching the chaos in the Middle East with a predatory eye, hoping the West's attention deficit will give him the breathing room he needs. Now the critical question, is Putin just a bystander in the Gulf, or is he an architect of the escalation? Putin isn't sending divisions to Tehran. He doesn't have them to spare, but he is sending the one thing more valuable than boots on the ground: signals intelligence. Putin's support is manifesting in 3 ways. Firstly, Russia is reportedly feeding Iran real-time satellite data on US carrier strike group positions. This removes the element of surprise. It allows Iranian swarms to find targets they can't see with their own limited satellites. Putin is also providing imagery intelligence to the Iranians, giving the Iranians the targeting data for US interests in Oman, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, and elsewhere. And also providing targeting intelligence into Israel for the Iranian-backed proxies to attack. Putin and the Russians are very much integrated into Iran's defense. Secondly, deploying Russian Kurushka 4 or Murmansk BN systems to Iran to jam US precision-guided munitions. This effectively Ukraine-ifies the Gulf, potentially blinding US drones and missiles just as they did in Donbass. And thirdly, Russia is fast-tracking the delivery of the S-400 Triumph and the Su-35 flankers under the 2025 strategic treaty he had with Iran, specifically designed to target American F-35s. If a Russian technician pushes the button on the S-400 that downs a US jet, the proxy war ends instantly. But as our next signals show, Putin is in for a rude awakening. Whilst the United States is bogged down in the Gulf, Ukraine has just executed the most significant battlefield shift we've seen in 2 years. The traditional battlefield has changed, and it won't ever be the same again. Month by month, the reach of Ukraine's long-arm drones has expanded up to 5 kilometers at a time. As a consequence, drones have evolved from a tactical nuisance to strategic depth enforcers. Since the emergence of drones in Ukraine, we're no longer looking at a war defined solely by artillery barrages and trench assaults that were the hallmarks of 20th century warfare, no longer defined by what we call the close battle, the range of direct fire weapons. According to Ukraine's top military commander, we've just crossed the drone threshold into an entirely new, terrifying era of combat. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi, officially declared that the war in Ukraine has entered a new technological stage, one where the undisputed kings of the battlefield are the unmanned systems. Syrskyi revealed this expansion of killing zones, and because the rapidly growing capabilities of strike UAVs, the no man's land between armies has grown wider and far more lethal. Moving in the open is almost a guaranteed death. And it is not just the killed and wounded that is significant. It means Russia is incapable of massing any force or piling stocks of ammunition and weapons for offensive maneuvers. This means Russian forces have to be pulled far back from the front lines for their own protection. To compound all of this, there's a Starlink blackout. According to Cloudflare statistics, Starlink satellite traffic has dropped 75% in Ukraine when Elon Musk decided to pull the plug on non-whitelisted satellites and accounts. Let that sink in. 75% of all Starlink web traffic in Ukraine was used by Russian forces, and now they can't access it. They're scrambling with makeshift alternatives that they can use for their drones and for their communications. And further afield, deep behind enemy lines, attritional attacks on Russian air defences mean Ukraine can disrupt and destroy the Russian defence industrial base. On March the 10th, Ukraine deployed 5 Storm Shadow cruise missiles to erase a critical node in Russia's war machine. The Crippling microelectronics plant in Bryansk in Russia. This was the second largest producer of military microchips in Russia. Over 90% of its output is fed directly to the Ministry of Defence. This is the discrete semiconductor technology and high-frequency transistors that form the nervous system of Russia's most lethal assets. The Iskander-M ballistic missiles, the Pantsir S-1 and S-400 air defence systems, and electronic warfare suites like the ones that are currently struggling to jam Ukrainian drones. A Ukrainian Shark drone, a high-end, long-range reconnaissance UAV, was loitering over Bryansk, 100 kilometers deep into Russian territory, providing real-time battle damage assessment. Russian analysts are reeling because their air defences didn't just fail to stop the Storm Shadows, they couldn't even detect the Shark drone watching from above. By taking out the assembly workshops and destroying millions of dollars of specialised Belarusian-made production equipment, Ukraine hasn't just damaged a building, they've effectively halted the production line for Putin's smart weapon for years to come. But within this highly lethal environment, a critical shift is happening. Sierski notes that Russia is actually losing the initiative, particularly in the southern sectors in Ukraine. How? By Ukraine rewriting the very rules of frontline engagement. Russia is fully aware of this technological shift, and they are throwing everything they have at it. Military intelligence indicates that by April the 1st, Russia plans to expand its unmanned system units to a staggering 101,000 personnel. Even more terrifying, Russian defence plants are now capable of churning out over 19,000 FPV drones every single day. It is an industrial avalanche of robotic warfare. But here is where the battle plans get truly fascinating. Despite Russia's massive ramp up in production, the Ukrainian defence forces are not just holding the line, they're maintaining a distinct advantage in deploying multi-rotor FPV drones. Let's look at the sheer scale of the destruction. In just 1 month, Ukrainian drones successfully struck over 105,200 enemy targets. That is an astronomical volume of fire coming from the sky. And they aren't just going after tanks. As we saw earlier, they're hunting the hunters. In that same time frame, Ukrainian forces hunted down and destroyed roughly 4,200 positions of Russian UAV operators. Ukraine is systematically blinding the Russian drone swarm by taking out the pilots controlling them. So how does Ukraine survive an enemy that produces 19,000 drones a day? Well, through rapid, relentless innovation. And Sierski emphasised that developing unmanned systems is now the absolute #1 priority for the military. Specifically, to pull the workload off the exhausted infantry. And to that end, Ukraine is heavily investing in fiber-optic controlled drones, weapons entirely immune to traditional electronic warfare jamming because they're literally tethered by physical wire, an optical wire. On the ground, it's a similar story. Ukrainian ground robotic systems are now doing the heavy lifting. In just 1 month, these unmanned ground vehicles completed over 2,300 logistical and combat tasks, delivering ammo, evacuating wounded and laying mines without putting a single human life at risk. But defence is just as critical to offence. To counter the Russian swarms, the armed forces of Ukraine are standing up highly specialised UAV interceptor platoons. These are dedicated hunter-killer units armed with electronic warfare systems, anti-drone rifles, and heavily engineered net launchers designed to specifically trap and destroy enemy quadcopters mid-air. All of this tactical brilliance on the battlefield requires an absolute revolution in logistics behind the scenes. And that is exactly what Ukraine has achieved. Through a new digital procurement network called the dot chain system, the military has completely bypassed old, slow bureaucracies. In just 7 months, this system has pushed 500,000 units of crucial equipment straight to the frontline units that need them. Even more impressively, Ukraine is shedding its reliance on foreign imports. The Ministry of Defence announced that over the past year, the share of weapons and equipment produced domestically inside Ukraine skyrocketed from 46% to an incredible 82%. They're building the arsenal of democracy right in their own backyard. We're witnessing the birth of a new era of warfare, the expansion of kill zones, the rise of specialised interceptor platoons, and an absolute reliance on unmanned robotics. The army that masters the machine first wins. For now, Ukraine's rapid innovation and domestic production are keeping them a step ahead in the most lethal drone war in human history. While the eyes of the entire world are glued to the Middle East, Ukraine was quietly orchestrating a masterclass in modern warfare. The biggest, most devastating news isn't coming from the Persian Gulf, it's coming from the Black Sea. We're breaking down one of the most dramatic, humiliating setbacks the Russian Navy has faced in this entire war, and they've faced a few. In an unprecedented massive drone operation, Ukraine has effectively dismantled Russia's most vital Black Sea naval hub. We're talking about the complete saturation of Russian defences and the crippling of at least 5 major Russian warships in a single night. For months, relentless Ukrainian strikes has made Russia's bases in occupied Crimea an absolute death trap. Putin's commanders panicked. They pulled a substantial portion of the Black Sea fleet to the port of Novorossiysk in Russia itself. A fortress they designated as their safe alternative. They thought they were out of range. They thought they were secure. They were dead wrong. Ukraine didn't just find them. They unleashed a coordinated, terrifying swarm of aerial and maritime drones, the likes of which naval warfare has never seen before. How do you break a fortress? You don't knock on the front door. You blind the guards. According to Russian sources and independent monitoring channels, a staggering 200 drones were deployed by Ukraine in successive relentless waves. 200 autonomous killers closing in from the sky and the sea. The scale of this operation completely dwarfed any previous Ukrainian naval or aerial drone attack. For the Russian radar operators sitting in Novorossiysk, their screens must have looked like a nightmare. The swarm proved completely overwhelming for Russia's vaunted air defense systems. The first wave had one job: force the rapid depletion of Russian interceptor missiles and take out the eyes of the port. And they succeeded brilliantly. In a matter of minutes, Ukrainian drones hunted down and obliterated the guidance radar of the fearsome S-300 air defense system. They also destroyed a state-of-the-art Panastyr S-2 missile and a gun unit, the very systems designed specifically to protect this port from low-flying threats. With the radar smashed and their missile tubes empty, the Russian defenders were left completely blind. The shield was down, and the second wave was already in the water. With Russian air defences degraded, spent and utterly chaotic, the subsequent waves of Ukrainian drones descended on the moored warships. This marks, without a doubt, one of the most successful Ukrainian naval operations in the history of this conflict. At least 5 moored Russian warships were caught sitting ducks. Confirmed hits include the minesweeper Valentin Pikul, which sustained catastrophic damage. The corvettes Yayesk and Kazimov were also ripped apart by explosive payloads. Satellite analysis by independent intelligence groups has revealed severe damage to the guided missile frigate Admiral Essen, including massive impacts directly to its central superstructure. Analysing the aftermath and satellite footage, military experts noticed a terrifying pattern. The initial drone strikes on these ships didn't just aim to sink them right away. They specifically targeted the electronic warfare systems, the radars, and onboard air defences of the warships themselves. Ukraine essentially lobotomized the Russian ships before subsequent strikes came in to tear their hulls apart. And the absolute chaos wasn't confined to the water. The strikes triggered secondary explosions all across the Novorossiysk port area. The Shazkeri oil terminal, a vital economic and military lifeline, was set ablaze. 6 out of the 7 Russian oil tankers present were hit, igniting a raging inferno that burned throughout the entire night and well into the next morning. The human cost for Russia? Casualty reports indicate at least 3 Russian servicemen were killed and more than a dozen wounded in the firestorm. The level of destruction inflicted in a single night underscores a chilling new reality for traditional naval powers: the absolute devastating effectiveness of unmanned systems. Let's state a fact that will be written into the military history books for centuries. Ukraine does not have a conventional navy. Yet through scalable, relentless and wildly inventive drone warfare tactics, they have systematically dismantled one of the world's supposed superpower fleets. They have destroyed or disabled roughly 1/3 of the entire Russian Black Sea fleet. The strike on Novorossiysk reinforces this trend with brutal clarity. It proves that even Russia's most heavily defended, deeply recessed port is utterly vulnerable when confronted with Ukraine's coordinated, intelligent drone swarms. There is no safe harbour left for Vladimir Putin's ships. The sheer scale of Russia's losses prompts a fascinating and, for the Kremlin, deeply embarrassing comparison. Recently, we've seen Iran's fleet suffer heavy losses when facing the naval might of the United States. Both Russia and Iran love to position themselves as central pillars of an axis of resistance against Western influence. Yet both have had their maritime vulnerabilities exposed for the whole world to see. But there's a massive difference in expectations here. Iran losing ships to the United States, the greatest naval superpower in human history, aligns with established global power dynamics. It makes sense. But Russia? Russia losing a third of its historical Black Sea fleet to a nation without a navy. That is a profound historical strategic embarrassment. The broader implication for the world is massive. Traditional multi-billion-dollar naval power is becoming nearly impossible to sustain without rapid adaptation to emerging low-cost threats. We're watching doctrinal changes happen in real time as global militaries scramble to figure out how to protect high-value assets in an environment where a $50,000 drone can cripple a $500 million warship. So let's have a closer look at these pioneering unmanned sea vessels. This is the new frontline of naval warfare. It is no longer about the size of your cruiser, it's about the invisibility of your drone. First of all, we have the IRGC's naval underground base. This is where Tehran hides its insurance policy. It's a subterranean missile city carved into the Zagros Mountains, but not used for missiles, used for drones, sea drones. They aren't just storing missiles here, they're launching USVs directly from these tunnels into the Gulf. This makes dealing with these by conventional US military capabilities nearly impossible. US carrier strike groups can't hit what they can't see behind 500 feet of granite. However, if they can identify where they're being stored, it means they can seal off an awful lot of these very quickly by blowing up the entrances and exits to these tunnels. And this is where the might of the US air power comes in. So next, let's look at the Sea Baby. This is the Ukrainian workhorse that just broke the impenetrable defences of Novorossiysk on the 2nd of March. This second gen model is a beast. It now carries a 2-ton payload and has a range of 1,500 kilometres. But the real signal is the modularity. We've seen them equipped with the Grad rocket launchers and even AA-11 Archer missiles to take out Russian helicopters. It's not just a boat anymore, it's a remote control corvette. Then we have the Rattler. This is a tech transfer in action. It's a low-profile, high-speed USV designed for swarm tactics. In the Black Sea, Ukraine uses these as distraction units to draw fire whilst the heavy hitters close in. In the Gulf, we're seeing Iranian-backed militias deploy similar wolf packs to harass commercial shipping and test the response times of the US and other vessels that are in the area. Finally, and most concerning, this is the Asdar. This is an unmanned UUV underwater vehicle. And while surface drones get the headlines, the Asdar is the silent predator. It is an Iranian-designed stealth drone that operates entirely below the surface, making it invisible to standard visual and radar sweeps. With a 600-kilometre range and a lithium battery engine that is whisper quiet, it is designed to lurk in the Straits of Hormuz, waiting for a signature. So with the Iranians and the Ukrainians having developed their own unmanned surface and subsurface drones, the West is playing catch-up. This is the Kraken, taking the best of all of the technologies and building a super unmanned surface vessel that can have similar sorts of impacts. Naval warfare is changing. But if you want the most chilling signal, look at the coast of Portugal. During NATO's recent REPMUS dynamic messenger naval exercises, something historic happened. For the first time in the alliance's history, the Ukrainian Navy was asked to lead the Red Team, the opposing force. They weren't just participating, they were the aggressors. The result? A total whitewash. Using their battle-hardened Magura V7 sea drones, the Ukrainian-led force won all 5 exercise scenarios against NATO's frontline naval units. In one convoy attack simulation, the Red Team scored so many hits on an Allied frigate that in a real battle, that ship would be sitting on the seabed. The most telling moment, 5 minutes after the Ukrainian drones had sunk the target, the NATO crews, the Blue Team, were still in the joint chat asking, So are you attacking us now or not? They didn't even see them coming. This isn't just an embarrassment for the admirals, it's a wake-up call. Ukraine is proving that a $100 million frigate can be neutralised by a few $100,000 worth of plastic and code. Whilst the West debates sending tanks, the Ukrainians have rewritten the naval doctrine for the entire 21st century. Whether it's the Black Sea or the Strait of Hormuz, the message from the REPMUS exercise is clear. If you aren't prepared for the swarm, you're already sunk. So that's all for today's Battle Plans Exposed. What do you think of Ukraine's latest naval victory? Is the expansion of the killing zones going to tip the balance in Ukraine's favour? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more frontline updates. And of course, if you like what you see, share it with your friends and tell everyone about this channel. But thank you for watching. Goodbye.